This video is sponsored by wreaking. How the Allies had done it, the Germans couldn't fathom. Somehow, an enemy force had infiltrated deep behind their lines into the rugged Spezia region of northern Italy, and they were wreaking havoc. With each passing day of December 1944, the attacks grew bolder, convoys ambushed, bridges destroyed, and supply lines severed. Panic gripped the German command. Orders flew. 2,000 soldiers massed at Pontremoli to find and annihilate this phantom force. But before they could begin their hunt, simultaneous strikes hammered 3 strategic towns along the supply route. Enough was enough. German authorities ordered a full-scale sweep, combing every mountain, village, and road in the Spezia region. They would hunt down this Allied force, crush it, and make it an example as they burned village by village looking for them. But the Germans were chasing shadows. The massive force they believed was tearing their rear lines apart wasn't a battalion, not even a company. It was 34 men. 34 agents of the SAS were about to take 6,000 frontline soldiers into a panicked, futile goose chase across the mountains of northern Italy. And they weren't done yet. The SAS commandos needed to adapt quickly to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. One moment they were silently observing German movements. The next, they were ambushing convoys or evading enemy patrols. Their ability to transition between different tactical scenarios meant the difference between success and capture. We at Dark Docs appreciate this kind of tactical flexibility, which is why wreaking's everyday earbuds have become essential to our historical investigative process. Their innovative quick charge function gives us 90 minutes of battery from just 10 minutes of charging, perfect for when a lead appears out of the blue, just like the urgent partisan intelligence reports that guided SAS operations. What truly impresses us is the ergonomic design that fits comfortably for hours of wear. When you're carrying out a research mission that spans weeks, comfort becomes as crucial as function. The optimized gel tips create a custom fit that never causes discomfort, even during our longest sessions. Best of all, not only do the everyday earbuds feature intuitive tap functions that let us control volume, skip tracks, and answer calls without reaching for our devices, but unlike other premium audio brands with similar features, wreaking starts at just half the price. Click the link in the description below or go to buywreaking.com/darkdocs to get 20% off the best-selling everyday earbuds. Brought to you by wreaking. Captain Bob Walker Brown's breath clouded in the freezing air as he gripped the steel frame inside the vibrating C-47. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, quote, 2 minutes to drop. Below, the Apennines sprawled in darkness, snow, rocks, and enemy patrols. Somewhere down there, partisans waited, or Germans. The jump light flicked green. Bob turned to his men. 5 officers, 29 enlisted, all SAS. Faces pale, eyes sharp. He barked, quote, no second chances, lads. Stand by. This was Operation Gallia, a high-stakes infiltration into northwestern Italy. 34 men were tasked with pinning down thousands of German troops, blowing bridges, and choking supply lines to the Gothic line near Bologna. A steel container dropped first, its parachute billowing in the black sky. A test. If partisans caught it, green lights would flash below. If not, the mission was over before it began. Seconds dragged. Bob's gloved hands clenched the doorway. 2 faint green lights flickered up from the valley floor. It was time to go. One by one, the men jumped, bodies flung into the freezing night. Parachutes snapped open in the biting wind. Seconds later, boots hit snow. Figures emerged from the shadows, guns slung across shoulders. Major Gordon Lett stepped forward, flanked by his ragtag partisan fighters, Italians, Yugoslavs, and even Austrian defectors. To the SAS team's surprise, steaming cups of tea were passed around, a surreal moment in enemy territory. But it didn't last. Lett's voice cut through the stillness, quote, no time for comfort. The Germans are stirring. We move at dawn. The first light of December 28th revealed the stakes. To the south, the Allies were locked against the Gothic line. Fortified bunkers, artillery nests, and machine gun fire, turning every inch into a killing field. The American 92nd Infantry Division was buckling near Livorno. Poor leadership, low morale, stretched supply lines. If the Germans reinforced from La Spezia or Genoa, the Allied advance would grind to a halt. That was why these 34 men were here. Before the operations could start, disaster struck on December 30th. A 6-man SAS team, accompanied by an Italian guide, set out from Montebello di Mezzo, tasked with sabotaging German convoys, disrupting supply points, and disappearing before dawn. Hours later, a partisan runner stumbled into the Rossano camp. Catching his breath, he gasped and said, quote, "They were taken, captured by fascist militia." The words hit like gunfire. The Italian guide had been executed on the spot. The SAS men were now prisoners, dragged into enemy hands and out of Walker Brown's reach. That same evening, more bad news. A resupply aircraft, flying through the jagged peaks under cover of darkness, failed to clear the ridge. It slammed into the mountainside, taking the lives of all 7 Allied airmen aboard and leaving the SAS men without the supplies they needed. Captain Walker Brown clenched his jaw. 3 days on the ground, and they were already bleeding men and resources. But hesitation would only benefit the Germans. That night, Bob ordered immediate retaliation, a lightning raid on the La Spezia-Genoa road near Brugnato. Under starlight, Walker Brown, his squad, and Gordon Lett's partisans moved into position at a narrow choke point. The distant rumble of truck engines crept closer. Just as the trucks crossed the threshold, a ball of fire lit the night's darkness. Mines erupted under the lead truck in dazzling bursts of light and fire. German voices shouted through the chaos. 2 cargo vehicles went up in flames as partisans and SAS agents melted back into the dark brush, leaving merely a burning wreck and German casualties behind. Axis reinforcements scrambled from Borghetto, but they were met by smoke and silence. Alarms went off in the local German command. This attack was direct and brutal, much more devastating than what partisans usually were able to achieve. German forces began to suspect the Allies had managed to introduce a large disruption force, perhaps paratroopers. The series of brutal attacks that followed would do little to dissuade them from that idea. The next blow fell on New Year's Day. Borghetto itself was hit, and a series of explosions rang through town. German troops scrambled to respond, but found themselves chasing shadows. On January 4th and 5th, the Magra Bridge at Battaglia became the next target. The structure was set to detonate just as a German truck convoy was crossing the bridge, taking down at least a dozen enemy soldiers. On January 6th, another SAS group targeted a German staff car on the La Spezia-Genoa road. A brief ambush led to a brutal firefight, but the SAS commandos had the high ground and the element of surprise, leaving the Germans confused and panicked. The result was a pile of German bodies sprawled on the roadside. That same day, a second team pushed eastward toward Pontremoli, scouting rail links and laying plans for future disruptions. But the Germans were no longer dismissing the raids as isolated acts of sabotage. They recognized the pattern. This devastation could not be carried out by small groups of partisans. They were being attacked by a large and well-organized army of commandos. Word filtered through the partisan network. A rastrellamento was coming, a sweep to find and decimate the guerrilla fighters. 1,000 soldiers amassed at Pontremoli alone, with more units mobilizing from La Spezia. Walker Brown didn't need confirmation. The hammer was about to fall, and if they stayed still, it would crush them. So, he made his move. On the night of January 19th through the morning of the 20th, Walker Brown launched a triple-pronged strike. It was an audacious, reckless affair. One squad moved on the road near Pontremoli, planting explosives and waiting in silence for the first convoy. Another squad struck at Aula, cutting lines and sabotaging supply caches. The third team hit Borgo Valditaro, disrupting critical routes and scattering German patrols. Brown's SAS team struck hard, mines exploding under German trucks, bursts of Sten gunfire striking German troops from all directions. The massive German column, assembled to hold down this very group, was thrown into chaos for a few minutes. But Brown could not hide his numerical disadvantage for long. The Germans immediately regrouped and began to pursue the ambushers. Walker Brown's team had no choice. They had to move, and they had to do it quickly. The SAS split into 3 groups, each one vanishing into the tangled mountain terrain as bullets hissed overhead and German shouts echoed through the valleys. In the chaos, Major Gordon Lett's group broke away. Hours turned into days as they dodged patrols, narrowly avoiding capture. On January 20th, Lett reached Rossano just as German boots began crunching into the snow at the valley's edge. There was no time to linger. Let's team climb to Monte Picchiara, a vantage point offering a wide view of the valley below. Smoke curled into the sky from burning towns and villages, retaliation for the partisan raids. Let watched the destruction in silence. But safety was fleeting. On January 25th, while moving through the valley near Cerro, Let's party stumbled into a German patrol. The Germans passed within yards, unaware of the men hiding in the icy underbrush. By January 26th, the sweep was over. Exhausted, starving, but alive, Let led his men back into the Rossano Valley. Walker Brown's team fared little better. Moving north of Rossano, they spent days evading capture, living on scraps and sleeping in freezing gullies. The mountains were as much an enemy as the Germans. Exposure could end their mission as easily as a bullet. But on January 27th, Walker Brown's team finally limped back into Rossano, weary but intact. The German sweep had been brutal. 7 days, 6,000 troops, and valleys were combed ridge by ridge. The SAS had escaped without a single man lost in action, but the cost to the local population had been steep. Partisan bands suffered heavy losses, and dozens of civilians were executed in brutal reprisals. But the German troops had been pinned down. Thousands of frontline troops had been pulled from critical sectors to chase shadows in the mountains. Operation Gallia was working. Yet in those chaotic days, the SAS had lost contact with their headquarters. On January 29th, Roy Farren, SAS commander in Italy, ordered a follow-up mission, Operation Break 2. The team, a replacement radio operator, 2 SAS men, and a partisan liaison, set out the next day, tasked with re-establishing communication. But the choice of liaison was disastrous. Primo Battistini, codenamed Tullio, was disliked and distrusted by local partisans. He'd been thrown out of the Rossano area before, and his return stirred immediate suspicions. For the men of Gallia, supplies were running dangerously low, and without reinforcements, they would soon face their own destruction. However, luck finally smiled on the SAS operatives, and the Break 2 men finally made contact. On February 2nd, a supply drop was made. Colonel John Cerny of the 64th Troop Carrier Group personally led the mission, threading his aircraft through enemy-patrolled skies. Weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies floated down under silk parachutes, along with a new doctor to tend to the exhausted men. Rearmed and re-equipped, Walker Brown's SAS teams went back on the offensive. On February 7th, one party struck a convoy on the road between La Spezia and Aulia, destroying vehicles and scattering German troops. Another team hit the La Spezia-Genoa road, choking key supply lines with fire and debris. But the men were exhausted, their morale eroded after months in the mountains. On February 10th, a message reached Walker Brown. Withdrawal was authorized. The SAS split into 2 groups. Each team was reinforced with additional partisans and a surprising recruit, a German paratrooper who had defected to their cause. Heavy weapons were buried or left behind, ready for the next mission. Gordon Lett declined to return home. The POW-turned-partisan leader had no intention of abandoning his allies until Italy was free again. He and his partisans stayed behind to hold their ground. The first SAS team reached Allied lines on February 15th. The second followed on February 20th. They had done it. 34 men had tied down thousands of German troops for nearly 2 months, disrupted key infrastructure, and left chaos in their wake. Captain Bob Walker Brown was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his leadership during Operation Gallia. The SAS had lost 6 men as prisoners and 1 too sick to leave Rossano, but otherwise they had escaped intact. They had delivered devastating raids, pinned down Axis forces, and drained German resources from the Gothic Line. A hearty Dark Duck salute to Raycon for supporting today's operation. You too can join the audio elite with their everyday earbuds, the ultimate piece of equipment for all your sound-based missions. Visit buyraycon.com/darkducks today for 20% off your pair.